distinct pleasure to welcome our next keynote speaker. Rebecca Winthrop is a senior fellow and co-director of the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. Her research focuses on education globally, with special attention to the skills young people need to thrive in work, life, and as constructive citizens. Dr. Winthrop, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sophie. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. This is a very important gathering. And I have 3 provocations I want to share with all of you in this session. The first one is around the inflection point we're at in human history. The second one is the role of universities and higher ed institutions within that. And the third is around how you might consider transforming the teaching and learning experiences of your students in your institutions. So let's dive in. First, all of you are here because you care about the future of this planet and the world. You know about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you probably are very well versed at what a pivotal moment we are in historically. We are at a true inflection point. In terms, environmentally, we're at an inflection point with massive global warming and a real need to pivot to have a planet we can live in by 2050. We're at an inflection point economically after several decades of improving income equality. We have turned the corner in the 1970s and 80s around the globe. In every region in the world, we're getting more and more unequal, and capital wealth accumulation unlike we've ever seen in human history. We're at a turning point socially. We are now more of an urban society globally than we've ever been before. We're at a turning point politically. We are in what some might call a democratic recession. There is lots of evidence to show that many countries around the world over the last 15 years have been moving away from democracy and towards authoritarianism. The latest count was 73 countries, which house about 75% of the world's population, are moving in that direction. This is very concerning. And of course, technology has been at an inflection point ever since the disproving Moore's law and the exponential change. And I would put the infodemic at the very center of this issue. Now with social media, fake news can travel like a virus, as the UN Secretary General calls it, just as quickly as a biological virus can. And it is very hard to solve problems when we can't even agree on what is real. So that is the context in which you are leading your institutions and in which you are creating leaders. And I would say that the second thing I really want to put out there is that I disagree with the statement that I often hear in policy debates in the media that schools and universities are passive recipients of change from the outside world and we're struggling to catch up. If you look historically, that is not true. Universities especially have made the society we are in today. 800 years ago, especially with the rise of the Western university across Europe, whether from Bologna to Paris to Oxford, there was a radical idea that truth and knowledge could be accessible to anybody, no matter their family, no matter their religious leadership, no matter their tribal leadership. That was a radical idea at the time. And it led to a massive increase over the last 150 years in just a couple generations of universal schooling, which completely changed how we parent our children, how society structures itself on a daily basis, how we prepare people for the world of work, what we count as knowledge and information. It made a massive change on society. And all of those things that I just talked about, the technological inflection point, the climate inflection point, the political inflection point, the economic inflection point, were created by people who were leaders, educated leaders. So actually, education is an active player in shaping society. And with that, I want to come to my third major point, which is you have a responsibility as leaders of schools and higher ed institutions to take that power and see where we want the world to go. And to really, I think, use the SDGs as the roadmap on how we need to navigate through this very difficult moment in our external world. And I would argue that the main thing you have to do is think deeply about the teaching and learning experience of your students and how you as an institution model the values that you want your students to have. And I would put out there 3 things for you to consider. The first thing I would suggest is to get very clear about the skills and competencies you want for your students. What do you want them to be able to know and do, and how do you want them to navigate this turbulent world when they exit? How do you want them to lead? And I would say, and here I can reference you to the book, Leapfrogging Inequality, and the report Learning to Leapfrog, which we've done at Brookings. Here I would say you probably want 3 types of skills. You want skills that allow young people to be flexible and adaptable in a very turbulent world. That is important. So these are things like making connections, adapting methods to different contexts, solving unfamiliar problems, being able to read and emotionally engage and understand others and communities. That's one. The second thing you want is deep understanding. So that's mastery of knowledge, and as well as facility with the process of learning. Again, here probably universities are more than anything focused on this. Disciplinary knowledge, depth over breadth is important. And the third thing I would say you need is a solid ethical, social, and cultural foundation to help steer young leaders through turbulent times. And there is a values dimension to this. Human rights, the values in the SDGs, which include gender equality, life with dignity, planetary stewardship, are the values that I think all young people need to hang on to, because it is values that will be the beacon as things are changing left, right, and center for them to hold on to. I often say, and I get in debates with my colleagues at the Brookings Institution who work on things like international terrorism. And some of the international terrorists are incredibly digitally literate. They adapt methods to new problems. They do great teamwork. They can really get to know something very well, but they just don't have the values steer. So they do have 21st century skills in many ways, but they don't have a compass to guide them through the world that we would, in sort of the bulk of society, say is a useful one. So you have to that's the first thing, get very clear on those 3 things, what it is you want them to be able to know and do. The second thing that I would offer that you should think about is, what are the teaching and learning experiences that young people will be engaged in to develop those competencies and skills? And one thing I've learned, and is very clear in education research across the decades, is if you do education reform and it doesn't change the teaching and learning experience of students, not much is going to change. So I would say really look carefully at things. There is a place for traditional didactic instruction, teacher-led instruction. Absolutely. There's a place for Socratic methods. And that's really good for critical thinking and deep reflection. But that won't get you all the skills you need. You need to do experiential things like innovation labs and entrepreneurship competitions. I really also would urge you to think about thinking beyond the classroom. How can you give experiences like teaching a geology class, Geology 101, by going out into the community and seeing if there's, this is one example from the University of Pennsylvania, working with community members who live in poor communities about lead poisoning, and seeing in their houses to see how academic knowledge works in practice. I definitely urge you to expand what counts as knowledge, and what counts as expertise, and what counts as experience. So that's the second piece. We know from the learning sciences that pedagogy is the engine of education, and you have to pay attention to pedagogy. And lastly, I would say what you need to do is to walk the talk. There is such a thing as the hidden curriculum. For example, and this is an example of a program or schools I have visited, schools where all the teachers were male, except for a handful. And there was, sort of wonderful curriculum and lessons around gender equality and discussions, except all the women teachers would have to clean the toilets and sweep the floors and make the lunch for the male teachers during lunchtime while the male teachers sat and prepped their lessons. That is a different message about gender equality that students are learning. That is a hidden curriculum. And you too, as universities, have a hidden curriculum. And here I would love to point you to a conversation I had recently that we put up online with Judith Roden, the former president of the University of Pennsylvania. And she said, we can't train our students to be civically engaged without demonstrating what an actively engaged institution looks like. And so things like what she did is thinking about, who are you employing at the university? Are you training up and employing people in the community? University of Pennsylvania is in a very poor community in Philadelphia. Have training programs, work with, employ local community members, invest in them. She had a Buy West Philadelphia, use businesses for food, for laundry, for whatever services in local community. She had a Hire West Philadelphia. She also did a whole thing on physical design. Universities and schools are often big walls between the accepted elite who get to go and the rest. She's turned everything facing outward and had community use the university as space for community improvement. Another piece was prioritizing this type of a civically engaged institution. She made sure, and her board supported her, to have this as a priority alongside the finance committee of the board and the audit committee, et cetera. So prioritizing it won't happen without that leadership. And lastly, I would say, just in conclusion, the last thing I would encourage all of you to do is to think deeply about the infodemic. If ever there were an institution in society that should rise up together collectively to combat fake news and this move towards not knowing what is truth and what is fiction, it is the universities and schools of learning of the world. And I hope that is something that across the board, every student that walks through your doors can get very smart at. And with that, I wish you well and Godspeed on all your work. Thank you so much.